It happened so fast. We were arguing about Christmas plans in my kitchen when my daughter-in-law, Jessica, suddenly lunged across the counter. Her hand connected sharply with my cheek. The shock was immediate, but what came next was worse. She dropped to the floor, hysterical screaming, for my son Daniel. Daniel, she hit me. She's abusing me. Get her away from me. I was left standing there, clutching my stinging face, utterly bewildered. Hello, I'm Eleanor. I'm 68 years old, recently retired from a career as a high school principal. That profession demanded authority, fairness, and absolute composure in moments of crisis traits I carried into my personal life. I'm accustomed to being in control and upholding ethical standards. My husband Thomas passed away 5 years ago, leaving me the sole occupant of our large traditional home. Our life was comfortable, predictable, and defined by order. I have one son, Daniel, 40, who works as a civil engineer. Daniel is a kind man, though perhaps too conciliatory, always prioritizing peace over confronting conflict. He married Jessica 6 years ago. Jessica, 35, is an attractive, highly charismatic woman, but she possesses a theatrical flair and an undeniable talent for drawing attention to herself, often through dramatic means. My relationship with Jessica has always been strained. I find her penchant for drama exhausting, and she views my sense of order and adherence to rules as controlling and restrictive. Despite our friction, I've always maintained a civil, if formal, relationship for Daniel's sake. My core belief is that integrity is paramount. The incident, the slap, and the subsequent false accusation didn't just wound me physically. It was a fundamental assault on my character and my lifelong reputation. I never raised my hand to anyone, let alone my son's wife. I was and remain determined to expose the chilling calculation behind her desperate, violent lie. My deep-seated need for composure, order, and predictable justice stems directly from my career as a school principal. For decades, my environment was structured by rules, and I was the final arbiter of fairness. This reliance on logic and ethical clarity became my emotional armor. I abhor emotional chaos and theatrics, viewing them as deliberate tools used to evade accountability. This is precisely why my relationship with Jessica was always fraught. She thrives on emotional upheaval and crisis. I found her frequent dramatic emotional displays exhausting and often questioned their authenticity. While she was performing for Daniel, my gaze was clinical, always looking for the subtle signs of manipulation. The quick tear wiped away the manufactured tremor in her voice. My own face often remained impassive, betraying none of my internal judgment. My greatest fear is the loss of reputation and integrity. As a principal, my character was everything. An accusation of abuse or unfairness would have instantly destroyed my career. The thought of being falsely accused, stripped of my dignity by baseless lies, is my personal nightmare, a complete reversal of the ethical clarity I spent my life upholding. I noticed subtle escalating shifts in Jessica's behavior over the last year. She became more brazen in her emotional demands on Daniel. If he dared to disagree with her, she would resort to tears, isolating him until he apologized. During arguments, my body language would stiffen. I often found myself holding my hands tightly clasped in my lap to prevent myself from visibly reacting to her histrionics. Jessica knew exactly how to target my vulnerability. She often made comments about my coldness or my authoritarian style, attempting to frame my principled behavior as abusive. Once, when I politely declined to fund a frivolous business venture of hers, her expression went from charming to venomous in a heartbeat, and she whispered that I just love controlling everyone. I dismissed it, but that moment was cataloged by my vigilant inner self. The entire conflict was set against the backdrop of my quiet, ordered home, my sanctuary. For Jessica to violate that space with physical violence, and then immediately weaponize a false accusation of abuse was not just a reaction. It was a calculated attack on my professional and personal identity. She knew that the word abuse would instantly trigger Daniel's passive protective instincts and completely obliterate my lifelong reputation for integrity. Her action was the ultimate betrayal of the trust I reluctantly extended to her as my son's wife. Daniel and Jessica's visits to my home were governed by an atmosphere of highly controlled surface-level civility. They came every Sunday for dinner, a tradition I maintained rigidly, viewing it as the structural backbone of our family life. Jessica often arrived late, usually with a dramatic story about traffic or a minor personal crisis demanding immediate attention. My face would remain neutral, observing her carefully. The primary point of friction leading up to the incident was predictably the holidays. I had meticulously planned the entire Christmas celebration, scheduling every hour and every meal, a practice I'd maintained since Thomas's death, to preserve a sense of continuity. Jessica had recently started pushing aggressively for us to abandon my home and host the entire event at her newly renovated but much smaller condo. The conflict was subtle yet constant. Jessica would drop pointed comments like, "It's so much easier at our place, Eleanor. No one has to deal with your 3 sets of rules." Daniel would nervously laugh, his eyes darting between us, displaying his chronic passivity and avoidance of conflict. He would try to mediate with small placating gestures, constantly seeking my gaze for reassurance that I wasn't too angry. The setting for the confrontation was my kitchen, a space I consider sacred to my order. We were standing by the island, the very symbol of my domestic control. The day before, I had politely but firmly shut down Jessica's latest, most fervent request to change the Christmas venue. I had stated that the tradition would continue at my home as planned, and that I would not be altering decades of tradition for convenience. Jessica's expression at the time had been one of barely contained fury, a flash of pure resentment that quickly vanished behind a forced smile. On the day of the incident, Jessica brought the topic up again, pushing the boundary one last time. She was leaning across the pristine white marble counter, her voice pitched high with feigned disappointment. "It's just so sad, Eleanor, that you always choose control over family spontaneity." My refusal was firm but calm. I simply said, "Jessica, the plan is final. Please respect my home and my decisions." My body language was stiff, communicating finality. This polite refusal of her emotional demand, this simple upholding of my boundary, was the ultimate trigger. She had been thwarted, and she reacted with the desperate theatrical violence that perfectly matched her need for control, knowing precisely how to weaponize the resulting chaos against me. The entire dynamic was a setup for her emotional explosion, carefully orchestrated to ensure she could play the victim. The argument escalated not in volume, but in intensity. Jessica was leaning over the marble island, her face twisted in genuine frustration, not her usual theatrical peak. "You are obsessed with control, Eleanor. You can't stand it when someone else is the center of attention, even for Christmas." I held my ground, my gaze meeting hers steadily. "I am upholding a tradition, Jessica. This house is my stability, and the rules are clear. I am asking for respect." My calm, reasoned tone was the last thing she wanted. She wanted a fight, a reason to erupt. My refusal to lose my composure seemed to ignite her. Her eyes narrowed and her entire expression hardened into a furious resentment that momentarily stripped away her charming veneer. This wasn't the playful challenge. This was hostile. Then she moved. It happened so fast I barely registered the motion. She launched her hand across the counter, her fingertips connecting sharply with my left cheekbone. The sound was a loud, sickening smack in the quiet kitchen. The shock was immediate and paralyzing. My body instinctively recoiled, my hands flying to my face. The pain was sharp, intense, and utterly disorienting. I stood there, stunned, the sudden violence completely shattering my sense of order and safety. Jessica, however, did not pause. The physical act was merely the opening salvo for her true attack. She immediately dropped to the polished hardwood floor, throwing her arms over her head and curling into a fetal position. Her silence lasted for 2 seconds, and then the hysteria began. She let out a piercing, ragged scream that echoed through the house. "Daniel! Daniel, help me! She hit me! She's out of control! Get her away from me! She's abusing me!" My emotions were a chaotic jumble of physical pain, shock, and mounting dread. I looked at my stinging hand on my cheek, then down at the woman writhing on my floor, screaming the ultimate lie. The betrayal was twofold. The physical assault followed instantly by the weaponization of a false accusation, the very thing I feared most. Daniel burst into the kitchen, his face pale with alarm. He saw Jessica curled on the floor, hysterical, and he saw me, the former high school principal, standing rigidly, my hand clutching my stinging cheek. He didn't ask a question. He didn't check on me. His gaze locked onto Jessica, and his passive conflict-avoidant nature instantly defaulted to the path of least resistance, protecting the loudest, most visible victim. "Mom, what did you do?" Daniel rushed to Jessica, kneeling beside her. "I didn't do anything, Daniel. She hit me," I pleaded, my voice shaking with raw indignation. My expression was one of pure shock and defensive fury. Jessica lifted her head just enough for Daniel to see her tear-streaked face, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She slapped me, Daniel. She's angry because I wanted to change her stupid rules. She's been verbally abusing me for months." In that moment, I realized the terrifying truth. Jessica's violence was calculated a preemptive strike to control the narrative. She knew that my reputation for order and integrity would make my initial reaction one of stunned silence and self-defense, giving her the crucial seconds needed to establish her lie. The shock wasn't just the slap. It was the chilling confirmation that she had manufactured this entire scenario. The shock of the slap faded, replaced by the acute, terrifying clarity of the betrayal. As Daniel knelt by Jessica, his gaze fixed on her feigned distress, refusing even to glance at my own visibly reddened cheek, I understood the terrifying simplicity of her strategy. She had created a perfect, unwinnable trap. If I retaliated, I was the abuser. If I stayed silent, her lie became the truth. This realization was the turning point, compelling me to move past shock and into strategic defense. Jessica was still issuing frantic, ragged sobs for Daniel's benefit. Daniel was whispering placating nonsense, completely absorbed in her performance. My emotions were a cold, hardening knot of pure resolve. My lifelong professional training kicked in document, assess, and control the scene. I took 2 steps back from the counter, my body rigid, my hands dropping from my stinging face. I carefully observed the scene, cataloging details, the proximity of the counter, Jessica's undamaged appearance, despite her dramatic reaction, and Daniel's complete passivity in the face of conflicting evidence. He had instantly chosen the easy lie over the difficult truth. I addressed Daniel, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. "Daniel, I did not touch her. She slapped me across the face and is now fabricating an incident of abuse to preemptively neutralize my opposition to her plan to control the Christmas holiday. Look at me." Daniel finally raised his head, his face showing fear and exasperation, not concern for my welfare. "Mom, please don't make this worse. You need to calm down. You're scaring her." That was the emotional explosion, not of shouting, but of absolute crushing disillusionment. The phrase "don't make this worse" confirmed his complicity in validating her lie. He was protecting her narrative, not seeking the truth. The trauma wasn't the slap. It was the chilling realization that my own son valued surface peace and his wife's manufactured drama over his mother's integrity. I walked immediately to the entrance of the kitchen, taking control of my own exit. I knew arguing would only give Jessica ammunition for further accusations. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady as I spoke to Daniel, my gaze piercing his. I am leaving my own home to ensure I do not respond to this violence. I am calling the police and logging an assault report detailing your wife's physical attack and her malicious fabrication of elder abuse. You are currently witnessing a crime, and you are choosing to participate in the cover-up. Jessica's screams instantly stopped. She looked up, her expression suddenly lucid, the calculation back in her eyes. The threat of the police report was the one thing her theatrical plan did not account for. "Don't you dare, Eleanor," she hissed, scrambling to her feet, dropping the victim persona entirely. "It is done," I stated, the finality in my voice chilling the air. "I am the victim of assault, and I will be treated as such. You will not control this narrative, Jessica. You chose to violate my person and my integrity. Now you will face the consequences of the law." The incident wasn't just about a slap. It was about the attempted destruction of my reputation. My body language straightened, radiating the authority of the former principal who knew how to handle a malicious student. I secured my door and walked out, clutching my throbbing cheek, knowing that the most brutal battle, the fight to prove my truth against her hysteria, had just begun. The moment I stepped out of the house, securing the door behind me, the cold night air stabilized my shock and solidified my resolve. I did not drive to a friend's house or a hotel. I drove directly to the police station. My justice building began with the official documented report. I was meticulous, detailing the exact time, the nature of the verbal argument, Christmas plans, the physical assault, the open-handed slap to my left cheek, and the immediate fabricated counter-accusation of abuse. I insisted on having the officer photograph the visible redness on my cheek as definitive evidence of the assault. The officer's polite professional demeanor confirmed that I was being treated as the credible victim, which was critical to preempting Jessica's inevitable report. My next action was securing my legal defense. I called my lawyer, a stern, experienced litigator named Mr. Harrison. I narrated the incident, including the context of the Christmas argument and Daniel's immediate validation of Jessica's lie. Mr. Harrison immediately advised me to file for an immediate restraining order, protection order against Jessica, citing the physical assault and the threat of ongoing elder abuse through malicious false reporting. The restraining order was a critical tactical move, not only for my physical safety, but to legally solidify my status as the victim and severely restrict Jessica's ability to approach or communicate with me. My emotions were channeled entirely into efficiency. I viewed this as a high-stakes ethical investigation, not a family drama. I then took steps to financially isolate myself from the resulting chaos. I immediately contacted my bank and placed a security alert on all my accounts, instructing them not to honor any requests, even those signed by Daniel, should Jessica attempt to gain access via pressure on my son. This cutting of financial access was a preemptive strike against any scheme Jessica might try to execute, while Daniel was preoccupied defending her. The most difficult action was dealing with Daniel. He called me repeatedly, frantic, begging me to just drop it and not ruin Christmas. I refused to speak to him directly. Instead, I sent him a single measured text message. "You witnessed a felony assault against your mother and chose to enable the perpetrator. All communication will now go through Mr. Harrison. Your wife is facing criminal charges and a civil protective order. This is a consequence of her violence, not my anger. Choose your next steps wisely." This message established an unbreachable boundary and forced Daniel to face the legal reality, preventing his passivity from controlling the situation. The entire process was executed with the chilling clarity of a professional dismantling a high-risk security breach. I refused to let her hysteria win. I had photographic evidence, a police report, and a pending protective order, all initiated before Jessica could even muster her next dramatic move. I felt a grim, powerful satisfaction. Jessica had relied on my character and my age to intimidate me. She had been met with the cold, unyielding authority of the law. The immediate filing of the protective order was a legal shockwave that forced Jessica and Daniel into a frantic counterstrike. Their goal was simple: destroy my credibility and get the order dismissed before the full hearing. This was the moment of extremely intense drama, driven by desperation. Jessica, realizing the gravity of the criminal assault report, did exactly what I predicted. She went public. She started making vague, tearful posts on social media, implying she was a victim of familial abuse by a controlling elderly figure. Critically, she filed her own counter-report against me, claiming that I had initiated the physical violence and that she had only reacted in self-defense. Her lawyer argued that my long history as an authoritative school principal proved my volatile nature and my capacity for abuse, attempting to paint my lifelong integrity as evidence of a hidden dark side. Daniel, meanwhile, became her reluctant but crucial accomplice in this narrative warfare. He called my daughter-in-law's family and even some of my former colleagues, tearfully claiming that I was showing signs of paranoia and erratic behavior since my husband's death. He claimed I was inventing the assault because I was obsessed with controlling the Christmas plans. He tried to portray me as an unstable, controlling mother who had snapped under pressure, attempting to direct the audience to hate my legal action. He specifically used the phrase, "Mom needs a psychological consultant. She's completely lost touch with reality." His calls were particularly painful. He called me directly, pleading, his voice strained. "Mom, Jessica's lawyer has evidence proving you're delusional. Just drop the order. You're ruining the family name over a scratch. We'll tell everyone you're just grieving." His use of grieving and delusional was a calculated attempt to use my age and my widowhood as a psychological weapon against my legal standing. I maintained my composure. My face remained stern as I refused to engage with his emotional blackmail. I knew their entire strategy hinged on the public believing the victim was the unstable aggressor. I instructed Mr. Harrison to immediately schedule a formal deposition, stating that I was eager to present both my photographic evidence of the assault and the testimony of the attending police officer. I looked at my reflection, my gaze hard. They were attacking my character, but they had severely underestimated the resolve of a woman who had spent decades enforcing the truth. The tension was absolute, but I was ready for the final strike. Jessica and Daniel's desperate public relations campaign and the motion to dismiss the restraining order provided the perfect crucible for the final strike. Their strategy relied entirely on painting me as the delusional, vindictive aggressor, but I held the undeniable physical proof of their lie. The hearing on the protection order was the appointed time for the truth was exposed. I entered the courtroom, supported by Mr. Harrison, maintaining the impeccably controlled composure that had defined my professional life. Jessica sat opposite, her face, a picture of carefully constructed fragility. While Daniel looked like a man being dragged toward the gallows, his passivity now manifested as terrified paralysis. Mr. Harrison began by systematically dismantling their narrative of my supposed instability. He didn't rely on my decades of professional integrity. He relied on objective, modern evidence. He introduced the initial police report, filed hours before Jessica's counter-report, establishing me as the first and therefore most credible complainant. Then came the physical evidence, the photographs taken by the responding officer, showing the clear visible redness and bruising on my left cheek. While Jessica's lawyer argued her action was self-defense, Mr. Harrison countered. Self-defense against what? A request to respect the Christmas schedule. And where is the physical evidence of injury on Ms. Jessica? We submit a clean bill of health, whereas Mrs. Eleanor Peterson has documented physical proof of assault. The true climax. The final nail in their coffin was the introduction of the surveillance footage. My kitchen has a discrete motion-activated security camera that records activity near the main counter, a remnant of a previous security concern, and I had secured the footage the moment I left the house. Mr. Harrison played the video for the judge. The video showed the entire interaction: Jessica leaning over the counter, the swift aggressive motion of her hand connecting with my face, the sharp audible smack of the assault, and then immediately her calculated theatrical collapse to the floor, followed by the piercing fabricated screams for Daniel. The camera clearly captured the moment she stopped screaming, looked up at Daniel's arrival, and pointed her finger at me, the picture of malicious calculation. The effect was devastating. The audio and visual evidence provided an absolute refutation of Jessica's entire defense. Her expression in the courtroom went blank, then filled with incandescent, impotent rage. Daniel finally looked at the screen, and his face crumpled. He saw the cold, hard proof of his wife's lie, and the sickening extent of his own passivity in enabling it. He saw the truth, not the performance. The judge, a no-nonsense woman, looked at the footage, then down at Jessica. The protective order was immediately granted, upheld with permanent terms. The judge explicitly noted, "The court finds that the physical evidence and corroborating video footage definitively established the petitioner, Mrs. Peterson, as the victim of the assault. The counterclaim of abuse by the respondent is found to be malicious and retaliatory." I looked at Jessica, my gaze holding steady, unwavering, devoid of either pity or triumph. The shame in her eyes was overwhelming, but the overwhelming satisfaction I felt was rooted not in revenge, but in the absolute vindication of my integrity. I had successfully dismantled the lie, using the truth as my weapon. The fight for my reputation was over, and the outcome was an undeniable victory. The judge's ruling permanently upholding the protection order and explicitly validating the malicious nature of Jessica's counterclaim was the final resounding affirmation of my truth. I won the legal battle decisively. The video footage had served as the ultimate shield against the corrosive power of her lies. Leaving the courtroom, I felt an intense, stabilizing rush of victory. The stinging humiliation of the slap was replaced by the fierce satisfaction of knowing my integrity had been proven in the highest form. I had defended my lifelong reputation for ethical conduct and exposed the theatrical cruelty of my daughter-in-law. But the triumph was not clean. The joy of winning was immediately shadowed by the profound, chilling reality of Daniel's passivity. He had seen the video, the undeniable proof of his mother being assaulted and lied about, yet his response was one of shame and avoidance, not filial outrage. That brought the sorrow of sadness for having raised a child only to be met with betrayal. The betrayal wasn't the slap. It was Daniel's instantaneous validation of the abuser's lie. The victory cost me the illusion of my son's loyalty. This loss, however, ushered in my liberation. For years, I had maintained the Sunday dinner tradition and tolerated Jessica's drama for the sake of Daniel and the manufactured family unit. The protection order and the public exposure of the video irrevocably shattered that facade. I was no longer bound by the mandatory condition of keeping the peace. I regained my life by shedding the weight of their expectations and their chaos. I was 68, and I was finally free to be Eleanor, the woman who demands truth and order without apology. My first act of true self-liberation was practical and symbolic. I removed every trace of Jessica and Daniel from my home. I changed the locks not just for security, but to cement the boundary. I repurposed the guest room they used into a new reading room, a sanctuary dedicated to my quiet intellectual pursuits. My hands felt strong as I shelved my books, replacing the uncertainty of their presence with the predictable weight of literature. I started reconnecting with my former colleagues who had heard Jessica's poisonous rumors. The public video footage served as an immediate, unimpeachable defense. Their shock quickly turned to admiration for my strength. My face reflected a newfound peace, free from the anxiety of constantly anticipating Jessica's next dramatic attack. I realized that my pursuit of order and integrity was not a flaw, as Jessica claimed, but my greatest strength. It was my meticulous nature that had led me to install the discreet camera, which ultimately saved my reputation and my freedom. The whole painful ordeal was the deserved wake-up call that forced me to accept that stability is not found in controlling others, but in controlling the defenses around my own ethical core. The emotional requirement was accepting the sorrow of Daniel's failure and prioritizing my own peace. The victory was sweet, but the emotional growth was the true and valuable prize. The absolute vindication of the video footage brought no immediate emotional relief. Instead, it ushered in a period of intense, painful internal conflict. I was protected by the law, and my reputation was restored. Yet the silence in my home was heavy with the weight of my son's absence and my own uncompromising resolve. The question that haunted me was not about Jessica, but about Daniel. Did I handle the betrayal of my son, his immediate belief in her lie, with too much severity? Did my need for absolute verifiable truth overshadow my maternal duty? I often reviewed the footage in my mind, not for the physical assault, but for Daniel's face as he knelt beside Jessica. His look of immediate pity for her and avoidance of me was the core trauma. That trauma fueled my swift, unyielding response, the police, the protective order, the legal isolation. I bypassed all maternal pleas, treating the situation purely as an ethical and legal breach. My professional identity as the principal who demands accountability had completely eclipsed my role as the forgiving mother. My internal conflict was agonizing. My mind argued, he enabled an abusive liar who attempted to destroy your reputation. He deserved the complete isolation. But my heart, the part I rarely allowed to speak, whispered, you are his mother. You left him alone with the consequences of a wife you knew was volatile. I realized my decisive action was not just about justice building. It was about seizing back control that Jessica had temporarily stripped away. My reaction was a complete rejection of my son's passivity, a failure to accept his inherent weakness. I sat at my kitchen island, running my hands over the marble where the assault occurred. I conceded that while Jessica's actions were criminal, my refusal to speak to Daniel, even after the order was granted, was rooted in a deeper fear. The fear that if I allowed his excuses, I would slip back into the enabling pattern that created his weakness in the first place. My body language remained rigid, a physical manifestation of the emotional wall I had erected. I was terrified of vulnerability, viewing any emotional softening as a strategic weakness. My failure, I realized, was the lack of empathy for the cause of Daniel's betrayal. He chose Jessica's lie because confronting her hysteria was too terrifying for his conflict-avoidant nature. I should have recognized that his immediate collapse into her narrative was a sign of his own profound fear and helplessness, not simply a malicious choice. By treating him as a co-conspirator to a crime, I failed to see him as a deeply compromised passive man, whose primary defense mechanism was always avoidance. This painful self-awareness made me realize I hadn't achieved true liberation. I had merely traded the chaos of Jessica's theatrics for the self-imposed prison of regret and hypervigilance. The true work of healing was not in winning the battle, but in learning how to love my son, despite his profound demonstrated failure of character, without sacrificing my own absolute need for truth and order. The mandatory condition for my future peace was clear. I had to find the emotional balance between my unyielding integrity and my enduring motherhood. The intense, unrelenting scrutiny of my own actions finally brought me to a point of resolution and painful growth. The legal victory over Jessica was necessary, but the task now was repairing the deep, fundamental rift with Daniel. I was safe and vindicated, but my heart remained frozen in the moment of his betrayal. The greatest lesson I learned was about the profound damage of unaddressed character flaws. My decades of enforcing order masked my failure to nurture courage in Daniel. His passivity was not merely annoying, it was the fatal weakness that allowed Jessica's violence and lies to flourish. I realized my error wasn't the protection order, but creating a son whose fear of conflict was so absolute that he would sacrifice his mother's integrity to avoid a scene. My growth began when I accepted that I was partly responsible for creating the man who betrayed me. I learned that true control lies in fostering resilience in others, not in maintaining an external facade of order. My first decision to improve the relationship was to initiate contact with Daniel, but under strict defined terms that respected the ongoing legal reality. I sent him a formal letter, emphasizing that the protection order remained non-negotiable, but offering an unconditional commitment to counseling for him, paid for entirely by me. The letter did not contain an apology, but it did contain empathy. Daniel, I know you were terrified of Jessica's volatility, and your reaction was one of self-preservation. I want you to address the source of that terror, not just the symptom. I need you to find the strength to choose the truth even when it is difficult. The emotional requirement was swallowing my pride and separating the criminal act, Jessica's, from the moral failing, Daniel's. I was offering a lifeline, not a bailout. I established an absolute boundary. All conversations regarding the incident had to occur in a mediated setting. I refused to let Daniel use my kitchen or my living room as a venue for emotional pleas or excuses. This enforced distance allowed me to protect my hard-won peace while still extending the offer of maternal connection. I made a firm decision to speak about Jessica only in factual legal terms, ensuring her chaotic influence could no longer penetrate my emotional life. However, my pivot toward a self-protection and boundary setting led to a significant error in decision-making. When Daniel finally realized the irreversible nature of his choices, Jessica had filed for divorce, taking their shared assets, and he was facing social isolation. He called me broken and ashamed. He wasn't asking for money or for me to revoke the order. He was simply begging to come home to sit in his father's old chair and feel safe. The deep-seated fear of being manipulated again, coupled with the stiffness of the protection order, which technically prevented him from simply walking in, made me hesitate. Instead of offering him the simple, immediate comfort of his childhood home, I suggested clinically that he rent a short-term apartment near my neighborhood, and that we could meet in the therapist's office. My logic was I must not allow his dependence to restart. He must demonstrate independence before being readmitted to my life. But the effect of this error in decision-making was that I replaced unconditional maternal love with a transactional condition. I treated his profound emotional trauma as a phase to be managed, not a wound to be healed. My face remained stern, reflecting the principal, not the mother. I missed the crucial middle ground. I could have offered him a separate space, like a vetted short-term rental in my name, providing stability without violating the legal integrity of my home or his need for independence. My daughter, who lives out of state, was the one who pointed this out. Mom, you won the battle for the truth, but you're losing the war for his healing. He needs his mother's presence, not just her funding for a therapist. This was the final painful realization. True growth means mastering the art of empathetic reconnection. I had successfully protected my integrity, but I was failing to demonstrate the compassion that should accompany it. The mandatory condition for my complete healing was now clear. I had to actively use my hard-won peace, not as a shield of isolation, but as a resource offered freely, recognizing that a mother's greatest strength is the capacity to love a flawed, broken son, even if she must love him from behind a legally defined boundary. If there is one profound, urgent lesson I want to share with you, the viewer, especially those navigating complex family dynamics and the modern risk of false accusations, It is this: your personal integrity is your greatest defense, but only if you document it. My story is a chilling case study in how a malicious person can weaponize an emotional lie, abuse against a factual truth, the assault underscoring the vital need for preparedness. First, let's address documentation and evidence. My greatest strength in this ordeal was not my moral clarity, but the surveillance footage, the cold objective proof that exposed Jessica's theatrical performance as a calculated crime. Her entire strategy relied on my word against hers, banking on the common bias against the controlling mother. My advice to you, regardless of your role in the family, protect your space with objective proof. Discrete security cameras in common areas are not an act of paranoia. They are a necessary mandatory condition for defending your reputation and physical safety against false claims. Never rely on the belief that the truth will come out. Ensure you have the evidence to make the truth come out. Second, the danger of passivity and enabling. Daniel's fundamental betrayal, his instantaneous belief in Jessica's lie, was rooted in his profound passivity. For decades, I prioritized family peace over addressing his inability to confront conflict. This weakness created a fertile ground for Jessica's emotional violence. My ultimate error was enabling his avoidance, which made him susceptible to her manipulation. For the audience, the unconditional commitment of a parent must include fostering moral courage in their children. Do not accept a child's passivity as kindness. View it as a vulnerability that can be exploited. My growth came from realizing that I had to force Daniel to confront his failure through legal means, something his own character would never have allowed him to do. Third, integrity as a weapon. When the slap occurred, my first instinct was to uphold my integrity by calling the police and securing the protective order, refusing to engage in her emotional narrative. This swift legal response established me immediately as the victim and the credible narrator. This is crucial. When faced with a dramatic false accusation, do not argue the emotion. Argue the facts. My composure, born from years of professionalism, was my shield against her hysteria. For the audience, you must maintain your composure not just for your dignity, but for your legal defense. The moment you lose control, you validate the aggressor's narrative that you are the volatile abuser. My liberation was secured the moment I chose legal objective action over emotional retaliation. My final message is one of necessary isolation. You must be prepared to enact strict boundaries, even a protection order, to defend your core truth. The pain of losing Daniel temporarily was infinitely preferable to the permanent malicious destruction of my lifelong reputation. Secure your truth, secure your safety, and let the law handle the consequences. So that is the shocking, painful truth of how my daughter-in-law slapped me and tried to destroy my life with a lie. The experience taught me that in the face of malicious theatrics, only objectivity and legal resolve can save you. I am safe. The order is permanent. And I'm focused on my life slowly and carefully rebuilding a relationship with Daniel based on honesty and his personal responsibility. I want to know what you think. Given the clear video evidence, do you believe I was too harsh in immediately filing the police report and the permanent protection order? Or was that the only way to defend my integrity? Have you ever had to use documentation to fight a malicious lie in your own family? Your perspective is invaluable to me. Drop your thoughts, comments, and your own experiences in the section below. I read every one. If this story helped you understand the critical need for security cameras in your home, or if you appreciate the frank honesty of the mother-in-law perspective, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next video, where I reveal the surprising quiet decision Daniel made about his marriage just 3 months after the hearing. Thank you for sharing in my journey toward honest peace. Until next time, defend your truth, secure your home, and always maintain your composure.